This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 206.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
What's up, SE Nation? Welcome back to another episode. My guest today, his name is Richard Jackson, one of the earliest people that I connected with, and he's now on the show. And he's one of those people that I guess I could talk to everybody for hours, which is a strange thing I noticed about myself, especially when it comes to sales engineering. But it was a great time with Richard, and we talk a lot about trust, building it, losing it, what trust is and all that it entails. So I don't know if you noticed, I'm a little bit under the weather, so I'm just gonna end the intro here and bring in Richard Jackson. I'll see you after the show. Good morning, Richard. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, Ramsey?
I'm doing well. So I am excited. I didn't tell you this before the show, but you're one of the first people to say yes to be on the podcast. And it only took us 3 years to actually find a slot that works for both of us. So I'm really happy you're here. It's been a long time coming.
Well, thank you. I'm excited. I actually heard about you first. I don't know if I told you. I was meeting with John Kerr after some training down in San Antonio, and he mentioned your name to me several years back, and that's how I learned of you and learned about your podcast right as you were starting up. And I got to say, I'm impressed with your the work you've done over the last few years. You've really built a community and stayed on track every week.
Well, I appreciate that. It gets easier when people like John Kerr, who have no business saying yes, being on the podcast, actually say yes to being on the podcast when he had like 3 viewers or 3 listeners. So because of people like them and yourself, I'm actually still here. Otherwise, I probably would have given up a long time ago.
Well, you're doing a great job. We appreciate what you're doing for the SE community.
Thank you, Richard. Do you mind telling the folks listening a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Richard Jackson. I lead a solution engineering team at Rackspace Technology between the Austin and San Antonio area. I live near the Austin area there, and we support our sales teams that in both install-based and acquisition side in our commercial segment. That's the team that I currently lead. I've currently been a leader for over 10 years, about 7 of those years as a SE leader.
Nice. Unrelated question to anything sales engineering, or let's see. It seems that a lot of people are flocking right now to Austin, Texas. What advice would you give a sales engineer who wants to go to Austin and live there for a bit and see what it's like?
Advice?
Don't move there.
Well, no, actually, everyone wants to say don't move here, but I actually think it's great because it just increases the property value, and so it also increases the taxes. But I think that's okay. I think it's going to happen inevitably. It's a beautiful area, Central Texas, and the Austin area. It's a nice area, and so there's a lot of tech companies that have moved recently. Oracle moving their headquarters, Tesla. So it's really built up over the years. I've been here since 1999, and it's grown dramatically during that time. So,
okay, so find a house now, buy it because prices are going to go up. We're not giving investment advice on this show.
Maybe just try to find an outlying area that makes sense for you, or else go right to the heart of the matter. And I don't know.
So you moved to Austin, Texas in 1999. You mentioned.
Yes.
Or were you okay? What made you go there?
It was actually the technology sector was booming in this area. At that time, they called Austin Silicon Hills. I lived in the Houston area, and there was technology opportunities in the Austin area that interest me, and so I made the move.
Okay. And how did you find your way into sales engineering?
Well, to quote another great author, John Kerr, again, I'm probably gonna quote John Kerr too much, but he's definitely a big inspiration for the role. It's the accidental profession is what he calls it. And for me, it was the same thing. I spent more years than I like to recall in IT operations. So, getting woken up in the middle of the night, taking care of things, and later leading a team to run operations for a subsidiary of Fiserv Corporation of Financial Services. And after doing operations for many years, I became interested in what was next in my career. And in talking to a recruiter, they mentioned sales engineering. And to be honest, I said, no, I'm an operations guy. And then they explained more about the role. And I said, that's actually exactly what I do. They put me in front of the customers to explain how it's going to work before they come on. And I help set those expectations and help guide the customer realistically to success.
I guess the difference would be when you were in operations, there were internal customers as sales.
No, it would be upcoming customers, because we had a web hosting division that I ran at that time. And so before they had those customers come on board, a lot of times they were larger financial services institutions. They had a lot of questions about how the operations would work, how the services would work. It was a longer sales cycle and so I would find myself in meetings before the customer had signed the contract, going through the details of how the implementation process would work over say a 9-month onboarding phase.
Okay. And when you move from operations into a sales engineering role, so which is basically sales focused, was operations when you're working with customers, were you focused on the sales or were you focused on the technology?
Oh, the technology and keeping it up. Definitely. It was just something that I had gotten when there were problems. I think I just enjoyed working with people, and whether they be internal customers, the development teams making the software, whether it be prospective customers or existing customers, or other internal team members, just sort of translating how the technology worked that we were operating and responsible for in relation to whatever role I was speaking to.
And when you moved into sales engineering, how did the way you work with customers change?
Absolutely. It evolved and became, moving into sales engineering, I felt like a duck in water after some time, because you're really able to help drive understanding what the problem was. So I had a big strength for me was actually solving problems. That's the thing that I really enjoyed. I don't know if you're familiar with the Clifton Strengths Finder and the 34 top strengths, but one of those strengths for me was restorative, or resolving issues. And so as a sales engineer, it felt like you're able to actually solve problems for folks by taking the time to understand what their challenges were, and also kind of being able to be honest between setting realistic expectations. If a certain sales rep maybe wanted to set too aggressive expectations, being able to sort of reset those and really build that trust with the individual, the organization on the other side.
So the reason I was asking is I worked in post sales. I worked as a network design engineer, so I visited customers a lot, but the sale was already done. And I noticed that when I became a pre-sales sales engineer, the way I interacted with customers it took me a while to get back to that, where I was always worried about like losing the deal, especially since I was a new SE, didn't have really great mentorship. With like the salesperson that I was working with a very experienced salesperson who frankly didn't know what they were doing, which made it worse. So it took me a while to get over that hump, to going back to like, yeah, I'm still doing the same thing. I'm just being consultative. One was before the sale. Now one was after the sale. Now it's before the sale. Did you run into anything like that?
Sure. I think the thing for me when I first became a sales engineer was before, when you're in operations, you get into a lot more details. You really get into every little nook and cranny and make sure you've got it covered. And in sales engineering, what I realized is I needed to use my experience to try to discern what was most important for the customer. So there are 10 variables, for example, for a solution.
Yeah.
Maybe 3 of which for this customer, and for a different customer, a different 3 or more, were the ones that we needed to spend the limited time we had together, because you never had enough time to go as deep as you wanted to. So then you had to make a determination. Okay, let's make some assumptions on these variables. we'll state those assumptions and say, look, I'm assuming these things are within sort of normal parameters. The over here, I think, is where your performance concerns are going to be, where your security concerns are, or where your, the specific business needs that are unique to your organization that we're going to sort of tweak the solution to solve for, and really digging down and spending time on those items. So it was, not blanketing the conversation with everything, but trying to focus it. And I think that was a big change, realizing, okay, we only have so much time, and if I really want to help them, I've got to focus on what's most important. And so really it became a matter of figuring out as quick as possible in across multiple conversations, maybe multiple on-site visits. It depended on the size and the type of customer and the type of project. What were those most important variables? And then also making sure they don't change along the sales cycle, because sometimes you have an assumption, you understand, and then all of a sudden there's a change that occurs, or you uncover something that no one knew, and then you've got to sort of evolve the conversation.
I think the biggest difference that I saw was after the sale, the customer is way more open in discussing their problems with you because they already bought and now they want you to solve the problem, like as part of the implementation team or the network design team. Whereas a pre-sales engineer, there's a lot of guessing and then a lot of verifying after the fact. Like, we assume these are your problems, but now I need to verify that these are your problems, and that's the tricky part with customers, because sometimes they just don't want to give you information. So yeah, I like what you just said. In terms of leading teams, you went from leading an operations team and now currently you're leading a sales engineering team. What are the differences or similarities between the two roles?
I much prefer leading the sales engineering team. The sales engineers, and maybe I'm just extremely fortunate, I have a great team. The team before was great as well. They were a good team, but when you're in operations, there's more coaching on a fundamental level that sometimes comes into play. Whereas with sales engineers, you've already got a certain caliber and capability, rock solid technical capability that you're working on top of, good business acumen, and then good communication that you're then just sort of trying to really point them in the right direction, explain how to deal with a challenging situation. They sort of have all the skills and they understand, and they've but sometimes just need a little bit of a realignment or maybe a broader perspective on that complex situation, whether it be an internal political one with sales on, we're going to do X versus Y, and trying to sort of work through that challenge, or whether it be working with internal teams, or maybe a tough customer. Okay, how are we going to work with this tough customer? All right, here's where that customer's coming from. They're feeling like they need to show their worth to their boss inside that conversation. So you need to let them do that, but don't distract from overall. You need to deal with the entire audience of the customer. So really just providing more help with realigning what they already knew, but then helping challenge them to bring their best to actually get better. I think as a sales engineering leader, or actually, let me rephrase that. As any leader, I think your job within a company as a leader is to grow the folks on your team through the work the organization needs done, right? That's your goal. That's it, plain and simple. You need to get the work done, and you need to grow the folks on your team. And so I think as a sales engineering leader, the opportunity to grow the members of the team was much larger, because in sales engineering, I think there's so much opportunity to move up and move around and help with other organizations.
So, okay. The way I'm seeing this is that you're a sales engineering leader. You work with customers, you work with salespeople, you work with your own engineers, and SEs do the same. They work with customers and salespeople and product managers and all that. And you mentioned the word earlier, like trust, right? So SEs have to build trust with almost a million different organizations, whether it's from external or it's internal to our own organization. You have product management, sales, product marketing, support. How does one go around building trust without coming off like I'm trying to fake, basically?
I think it's really simple, Ramsey. You can't fake it. You've actually got to care. You really, uh, there is I think first and foremost, you've got to genuinely understand your role in each relationship, internal and external, and sort of find peace with it, whether you're frustrated with something or whether you're excited about it. You genuinely have to care. I don't think you can, I think people are smart, and you've got to genuinely care. But once you genuinely care, you can then use that caring to apply some principles. And one of those is the trust equation that Charles Green laid out initially in the Trusted Advisor, and then later John Kerr extended that equation to talk about how you build trust. And so I think you can use those principles that are defined in that equation to apply to real life while you care, but you have to care first, in my mind.
Okay. All right. A couple questions came up, but let's tackle first like the trust equation. For those who haven't purchased John Kerr's book, pause this show and go out, get it, then come back and finish the show. Don't forget about the show. But let's talk about the equation a little bit. When you say equation, the first thing that pops in my mind, but like if there's a formula for it, I can surely fake it. So can you talk a little bit more about the equation and why we can't fake it?
Well, I suppose you could always fake something, but over time, so you'll get sort of found out. And I think about that as a pre-sales engineering leader. I think about that in terms of my direct team that I support, that reports to me. And when I ask about a problem they're having, or ask about their family, or ask about their career, what's next, I really, for me personally, that's the only way I know how to work, is I actually am interested in what's going on, what the challenge is, and trying to actually solve their career challenges, give them feedback, give them ideas they might not have thought about, give them ideas with a tough customer about how to work through, and maybe someone else to talk to. Maybe it's not me typically that is going to give them some enlightenment technically, but I might have instead a contact somewhere else in the organization that would be able to help drive that specific solution based on my experience. So I think caring gets you a long ways. I go back to where are we going? I kind of went off the rails a little bit, Ramsey, on that one. Where you're trying to take me to a certain direction.
Well, we were talking about the trust equation, like what it is, and people should go out and get the book, obviously. But we wanted to talk a little bit about the trust equation. I don't think caring is part of it, but I guess it's
correct. It's not.
Everything has to be part of caring. Like it's an overarching theme, I guess.
It's so the trust equation is trustworthy. It's trust on one side. It has a bunch of variables that are in the numerator, and then one in the denominator. And so let's start with the top part. So we've got credibility, reliability, and then intimacy. Now with the thing that's on the bottom and the denominator that divides through and makes it all smaller, self-orientation. A classic example of self-orientation would be a bad salesperson, for example, a used car salesman, that sort of negative connotation of sales, which I think is, I think we're in a new era where that doesn't work very well. I think that there's good sales is referenceable sales that goes on, right? That you can come back to again and again and keep working with. Yep. But there are salesmen and women who might choose to take a approach where they're focused on themselves. Perhaps, hey, I'm gonna sell you what's gonna get me the best attainment this month or this quarter, and I'm not gonna worry about what's best for you. And so that self-orientation, I think, comes across, and I think that's where the caring is. It's, do I care about you, Ramsey, and the customer that I'm working with, or the other individual on the team or internally, or do I care about myself? And so I think that's where is the majority of my caring, or where is it focused, my efforts? Is it focused on me? If it is self-oriented, then it deteriorates everything else I do on the top. And so the credibility is being consistent, working through, being able to, credibility would actually be the credentials, being able to say, I've got this experience, these technical certifications, I understand these technologies. That would be your establishing credibility. For SEs, that's pretty easy. Usually we're sort of bringing that to the table. Reliability is the say-do ratio, doing what you say and being able to follow through. Hey, I told you I'd get you this information. I got it. I followed up on your questions. I got the answers. just being consistent and reliable. And then intimacy is probably the one that's sort of not intuitive, and that would be understanding the customer's needs. Really, first and foremost, what are they solving for? What's important to them? And I think, one of the other quotes, because it's been a few minutes since I quoted John Kerr, so I'm going to go back to him since he's the one who brought us together. And he has a nice saying that I enjoy that is around why customers buy. Customers don't buy from those with the best technologies or the lowest prices. They buy from those who understand them the best. And so that's really what intimacy is. I understand what you're trying to solve, and I understand how my solution is going to solve your problem. And being able to understand their problem and then articulate that back is the difference between your competitor and you more times than you might realize. And that might be understanding the political purchasing process within the organization and what they're trying to solve. It might be understanding technical details, or it might be understanding timelines or risks. But you're trying to reduce those risks. And so understanding those risks appropriately and then being able to map them back to your solution, that's really, to me, what intimacy is. And that's really where I think the sales engineer shines, and being able to figure that out.
Yeah, like I don't want to push back. Like whatever you said makes sense. I would just add, in the absence of intimacy, customers will buy based on basically price. If you haven't figured out what their actual problem is, and if you and the customer and the competitors provided the same solution for the same problems that were just the low-hanging fruits, that's when, I guess, the pricing comes in.
All right, so I think this is now we're having a good conversation, Ramsey. I like this. I enjoy collaboration, and so now we're getting to some good collaboration. So you would challenge the intimacy part.
I'm not challenging the intimacy part. I'm saying if it's missing, that's when, like, right, we all say don't sell on price, right? We all talk about don't sell on price, sell on value and all that. Value doesn't come, like, we have to be intimate with our customers and understand what the hell they need. I don't know why I said the hell right now, in order to provide value. Otherwise, it's
agreed.
Whatever the customer told us.
I think you uncovered another part of it. I would agree with what you're saying. If you're selling a commodity,
yep,
it's not differentiated from anything else, then I would say you're not doing your job as a sales engineer. Okay. Yes. But I understand how you can get thrown in that bucket sometimes. An RFP might throw you in that bucket and try to normalize you with everyone else. And so your job is to separate yourself from, and that's sort of the challenge. I think the RFP, as I mentioned, is actually a good, that's what you're missing, is intimacy usually in an RFP process, for example. You're missing the ability to understand. You've got to break through that somehow. You've got to sort of break through the process and get to the other side and understand what's really going on with whatever contacts you have to show the value. So I would agree with you that value, to really show value, you've got to have that intimacy. So if you don't have it, then now you're looking at price versus sort of differentiating yourself.
I mean, I can give you this example. I work with the same customers over and over. Right? It's not like new customers. And when you work, sometimes you fall into that trap where you're working with the same customers. They're just going to ask you for things. They're going to ask you for more licenses for whatever, like, or let's say you're selling computers, laptops for customers. They're just going to ask you for more laptops every time they have a new customer come in, but a new employee come in. But at some point they might say, like, oh wait, these guys are not providing us any additional value. We can just go, instead of buying from HP, you can buy from Lenovo, right? It's an easy move whenever they need to refresh. And as sales engineers, sometimes we fall into the trap, well, they're just buying, I'll just support them with whatever questions they have. And it took me a while to get over that, where trying to understand, like, why are they buying from us? And if they were to move, why would they move? And once I figured that out, I figured out they need specific things. That's what I started focusing on when I'm supporting them, highlighting these areas. These are the value that we provide to you. And that all came from intimacy. Right?
The intimacy is also it's listening. If I can think of a couple of analogies, one that comes to mind, if I were to walk into a doctor's office with some type of ailment, and within 60 seconds they say, here's your prescription, that's what you need to do, and they hadn't even heard all my symptoms or my personal situation, maybe at least 2 minutes or 3 minutes, right? Then do I trust them? They might be right. They might actually just know, hey, you've got allergies or you've got this. I know what this is. I've seen 20 of these this week. But to you as the individual, you think, do they really understand what my problem is? And so do I trust the solution that they're providing? And that's what I think about there is you have to allow the customer or the internal or the member of your team that you're supporting time to explain. It takes time to articulate, and then that is what builds the trust, is the listening. So a big part of the trust is actually the listening time, and that's where the intimacy comes out. Now the problem is with customers, they're busy, as is everyone else, but a customer is going to look at that and say, why am I going to be on the phone with you? So you've got to bring value to that conversation. You've got to bring additional information and context that they weren't expecting, that makes them think, you know what, this is a value to me in my business. I'm going to stay on and listen to some of this, understand, and then and only then, I think that's when you're able to sort of start to pull out more, by asking. Sometimes it's asking good questions, sometimes it's giving good information. But if you show those either value by the good questions or value by providing additional information they weren't aware of and capabilities and technology, then hopefully, ideally, at some point, you get to unravel a little thread and you get to pull on that intimacy. And if you just know that you don't have it yet, then you got to look for opportunities to try to pull on that thread and solve that.
So if I understand you correctly, like for my situation, it took years, and a lot of SEs don't have years, right? Like we have, especially if it's a brand new customer, you have 1 meeting or 2 meetings to get that done. If I understand correctly, you're saying like within the first meeting, you have to ask enough good questions and provide enough good information to entice them to a second meeting and like a third meeting, just to get to build that intimacy? Or are you saying like from the first meeting you have to build that intimacy right away?
So that's a great question. I think the way that I break that apart is into 2 aspects. One, there's a team part. If you're working with a sales exec on that with the account, maybe there's someone else involved. If it's an existing customer, maybe there's a customer success manager, someone that type of role. There are likely others besides just you as the sales engineer that are engaged. And so actually the way you're trying to address this is trust with the customer, not just you. It's not all about you. It's about the team. So for example, let's say you've got that existing customer and the sales rep's been working with them for many years, and say they have a fantastic relationship. He or she may actually have that information. So you may need to go get it from them and pull on it. And to be honest, you may not be the rep in that case, may have built the credibility and the intimacy, and not you. And so now what you may have to do is just provide rock solid reliability. Or there is one other variable we didn't mention. So we'll come back to that in just a second. But I think that as an account team working together, you need to be thinking as a team. And look, if other people you're working with aren't familiar with that, and maybe it's too laborious to try to explain it when you're working through, you just ask yourself, okay, we're having a little bit of trouble here. What's the problem, right? And you might see, well, the sales rep's showing too much self-orientation in the way they're trying to say, hey, I need you to sign by Friday because it's the end of the quarter, but the customer's not ready. So now you have to think to yourself, okay, they're feeling this challenge. How can I help? Well, the reality is it's going to take a long time to implement the solution. Maybe I can turn this around, help the sales rep. They're trying to help solve the problem more quickly. And if it's indeed a real problem that we need to solve, why would we not want to solve it more quickly? So now you can kind of spin that around in your head and think, okay, why don't I explain to the customer after they sign what it's going to take to actually get the solution online, get it normalized, get it ready to go into operations. And now we're not focusing on what's good for me, we're focusing on what's good for the customer. And so I'm able to sort of counterbalance that. So I think there's an equation to answer your question. You asked, is it on the first call or the second call? Look, I think for those that are listening right now, there's a variety of businesses, with our enterprise customers, we might, work over an 18-month sales cycle, 9 to 18 months. For some of our commercial customers, it could be the same, or it could be a 1-month sales cycle. It depends. Yeah. And mid-market can be in between there. So I don't know how many meetings are involved with each of those. So I think it's a question of what am I missing right now to help build that trust? And if you think you're going to close a sale without that, you might get lucky the first time, but eventually you're going to have trouble, and you're probably going to have a smaller sale that you could have increased the sale if you had more trust with that customer. And so I think the trust is what's going to get them to tell you. You mentioned after the sale, you had that experience, Ramsey, where the customer actually told you what was going on. They were more open. It's because they had the trust. I would argue that you could have built, there's an opportunity. Obviously it's easier post sale to do more, but it's also actually harder in another regard, because expectations are more malleable early in the sales cycle. And I think this is where the sales engineer's magic comes in. Hey, we're first talking with a prospective customer or maybe an existing customer about a new part of our portfolio or technology. Right now at the beginning, expectations are a blank slate. And so as the SE, I can reframe. Hey, we're not going to actually be able to do this part. We're going to do this for you, but you're going to need to bring this to the table, right? I can provide these security capabilities, but for audit perspectives, you're going to need to be auditing these logs and have a process. And I can help you a little bit with that, but you're also going to have to partner with me to actually pass your audit with your QSA, to use a security example. So I think post sale at that point, the expectations might have gotten set erroneously. And now you have a problem because now you're trying to go back in time and change things. And so I think earlier on, you have the chance to change things. And if you build the trust, you can sort of get things on a better trajectory early on.
I love that you said, so when I first started, when I read John's book, and the trust equation, it was all about me. Like, I'm reading it and this is like my relationship with my customers. But you're right, it's a team thing. We have multiple people interacting with the customers, and every single person may add to the trust that you have with the customer has with you personally. My salesperson can add the trust. If my salesperson says something incorrect and I don't correct them, and the customer figures that out, I lose credibility. I lose trust. But here's the thing that I see. Sometimes a lot of SEs feel like, oh, the salesperson is kind of ruining my relationship. But also on the flip side, a lot of salespeople are afraid to bring their SEs in because they might ruin the deal for one reason or another. So we also need to develop that trust with the salespeople. Now,
absolutely,
like, for the
partnership,
yeah.
Partnership with the SE and the sales. To me, that's the one thing. If I were going to give a new SE, you talked about an SE moving to the Austin area. I don't have real estate advice necessarily, but I do have SE advice, and that is, you've got to think about partnership mentality with your sales team. You are truly partners together, and what that means is, a partnership means that I can if we're partners on a project, Ramsey, I can challenge you. Hey, why are you doing it this way? Or have we thought about this? Or have you gone and asked these questions or done these things? And you in turn can do the same with me. Hey, Richard, why do we choose this solution versus that? I thought maybe we could, and let's have a dialogue about that and make sure that we're all sort of bringing all our perspectives and experience to the table to be better as a team. And I think that that's sort of how you approach that relationship versus, hey, I'm here to be a resource on your call. It's like, no, we're going to go do this together, and we're going to respect each other. And we're going to treat each other with respect, and we're going to understand that each of us has a role to play. And we're going to try to make each other's roles stronger by understanding each other's roles and partnering as we sort of move forward.
So you mentioned some SEs are being used as a resource more than as a partner. If someone is being used as a resource, how can they change that so they are viewed as a partner, especially if they're covering? It's easy if you're covering one salesperson, but if you're covering multiple salespeople, how do we do that with every individual salesperson that we're working with?
That's a great question, and I deal with that question a lot with newer SEs that I bring into my team. We've had the opportunity to bring some really talented folks within our support organization into sales engineering for the first time. And that is one of the coaching conversations that I will have during the onboarding process, is getting that in their head about how we want to approach it. And then I give them that's the strategy to build is a partnership mentality, but the tactics that you deploy, in my mind, I could give a few examples. So one is pretty simple, and that is, when a sales rep doesn't use you as a partner, sort of calling that out pre or post call, right? And having a dialogue. Uh, hey, the way you introduced me, I think it would work better if we allow me to introduce myself and explain my role versus you, right? Here's an example. Right? So sometimes you'll get introduced in a poor way that sort of starts things off on the wrong foot, or expectations are set wrong. Another example would be follow up on a call. A common issue might be, when are we going to get a follow up deliverable that maybe heavily depends on the SE to provide some input, to provide, say, another quote or whatever it may be. And now you get to the end of the call, you're trying to schedule next steps, and does the rep say, hey, I'll have this to you by X? Or instead, does the rep maybe via chat already say, hey, when do you think we could have this? What are your thoughts? Or live on the conversation and just say, hey, customer, what are your timelines? What's it look like on your end? Really kind of understanding the customer's needs first. You want to push and be more aggressive. The customer says, I don't need anything for 2 weeks. All right, well, let's try to push things forward a little bit, right? Let's be realistic and keep the momentum going. Or the customer says, hey, actually, Friday I've got a board meeting. If I could have this on Thursday to review, and we're sitting there on earlier in the week. Hey, to their SE, is that something we can do? And really allowing the SE to kind of talk through, well, I could give you ballpark pricing, but I won't be able to give you the final pricing because I need to go through and we need to get some more information from you. That's a partnership mentality where we're building trust and not saying, hey, as a resource, you're going to get me X by Y. And so I think you want to coach the rep post call or pre-call on how that's going to work. And look, you're not going to get it just on one call, but one of the things I believe strongly in is alignment between the way we structure our organization at Rackspace. Is we have alignment between those reps and the SE. So let's say if you had multiple reps you're working with, it's always the same reps for an extended period of time. So now you have a chance to go build that partnership and say, hey, I really appreciate it if you would do it this way. And here's why I think we'll get a better outcome. And I think we'll be able to go faster, and we'll look better in sort of how we go to the customer. We'll be organized and sort of singing from the same piece of music versus not aligned in front of the customer. So that's one tactic. I think it's feedback back. As far as other tactics go, I think explaining the why, which can be challenging sometimes, but explaining here's why we need to do it this way, and because there's these impacts. If we don't get this information, then we could have these risks post-sale, and nobody wants to have a post-sale issue where we have to go back and then redo something because we missed information or have to add things that have substantial impact. So we want to make sure we're very thorough in the beginning, and then also explaining, hey, by allowing us to go deeper and do the things that I'm trying to bring to the table, we actually have the ability to do what my job is, which is to increase the size of the deal, accelerate it, and at least make sure it's going to close, right? Like that, if it's the right deal.
Nice. All right. We're about to move on to the not so fire round, but before we get there, you mentioned something earlier, is like you have to understand your role in each relationship. We already, hopefully people listening already understand the relationship between us and sales, and us and customers, and everybody, like let's say CSMs. But I want to throw in a couple of organizations that I want to see what your relationship is, or how you understand that relationship. So what is your role in the relationship with support, like technical support?
I think typically when I'm involved in that type of role, it's understanding what it looks like from their perspective and what they can deliver, so we can set expectations properly, as things might change over time. So there's two parts. Looking forward, what can you do? How do you do things for customers? And what can I do to make it help you exceed expectations? Like, what expectations can I set that you can exceed versus me setting expectations that are going to be impossible for you to even meet? So that's certainly one thing. I guess I think of those as sort of table stakes in the onboarding process, understanding how support works and provides. But you need to stay in sync because things change over time. As products are launched, they evolve and live. Typically, as an SE leader, I'm involved more where there's a problem, something's gone wrong, the customer's unhappy, doesn't feel there's a challenge, and so in those situations, it's understanding whether we have the wrong expectations with the customer. We set the wrong expectations, and the customer's expecting something we're never going to deliver proper the way they, or whether our support organization needs to rise to meet that standard. It can depend on the situation. And so really trying to understand sort of where the fairness is, where are we, where's the problem, and then go focus on that. If it's a customer reset expectation, then I'll come in as the bad cop and say, hey, look, I know you thought this or you were told this, but here's how it works, and here's why we're not going to do that, because there's these risks involved. So instead, this is why we're not going to delete your data, for example. We're not going to control this part of your data source because it's you own it, and we don't want to take that responsibility. If it's a situation where we made some errors, and we need to own it. We need to own what those problems were, and then make a course correction, and try to get steps in place to resolve that process. So I think, in summary, it's understanding what it looks like from, when I look at hiring and I look for those technical skills, I'm looking for someone that can understand what it's like for that support individual to deliver those services, because they've had some experience technically with understanding that complexity, so that they can empathize and kind of set proper expectations. I think as a SE, though, you're in a much stronger position to deal with an upset customer if there is an issue there with support, to go reset expectations or explain or get in, and then actually focus on what's the solution for it. I always think about the solution pathway in any problem. Okay, we've got all the problems. We've got the water under the bridge. All right, we've maybe everybody's made a mistake here and there, but what's the solution pathway, and how do we avoid those going forward, and trying to find that. And so technical support is no different. Hey, what can you provide to help make that solution go forward? What can I provide in communication back to the customer and explaining, et cetera.
Okay, and the other question is, you most likely read the SE manager's handbook from John Kerr, because you like John. Who doesn't? But he says in that book that SE managers should also still work with customers. It's not like now I forego customers.
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, we just forgot that there's still P as part of the equation, and I don't want to. That's a more important aspect that we need to discuss. So let's just go back there.
Okay. Well, just
so
there was one more. So I described the equation as it was sort of historically evolved, but there was one other variable that John Kerr added to it, which is P. So we talked about trust equals credibility, reliability, intimacy divided by self-orientation. All that in parentheses multiplied by one more variable is positivity. And I think this is the magic that an SE can deliver. That's really an important one. And so just quickly, positivity, it could give you an analogy. If you've ever had to work with a doctor, a lawyer, maybe a security is a great example. A security person will tell you, oh, you have these security risks and you have all these problems. And it's easy from a security perspective to point out a risk. That what you're looking for from an advisor, a trusted advisor, whatever field or profession they're in, is, hey, you have these risks, but generally, if you take these precautions, you're going to be okay. I've seen most folks be successful when they do these things, and it's going to be okay. And it's sort of being able to wrap up, hey, I'm going to tell you that there's problems. It's not going to be perfect. I'm going to set accurate expectations. We're going to say, hey, at the end of the day, we do this. We understand the problems, and we're going to mitigate them, and we're going to take care of you. We got this. And so I think that's the wrapper that as an SE, I like to say, let's put the bad news first, and let's get that out there. Set the expectations. Let's spend 5% of the call talking about what's not great, what's a problem, what we maybe can't do 100%. And let's spend the other 95% of the time talking about what we can do and how it's going to be okay, and what else we can do that maybe you didn't even think about. That's positivity in my mind.
I think I read something similar in spin selling, where they spin selling, they talk about like, oh, focus on the problem. But if you focus on the problem too much, now you're scaring the customer. Correct. You have to provide a solution. If you just pointed out problems and you don't have a solution for it, you just wasted everybody's time, really. So
yeah, I think it's like the next level, Ramsey. You start out with, hey, I know there's a problem here and I've identified it, and it's like, great, welcome to the team. What are we going to do to solve it? And do you have the experience to not only recognize the problem, but provide a solution, and then give me the confidence to know that it's going to be okay. I think that's what you want, or you want to go to that professional and you want them to tell you it's going to be okay. You don't want to lie. You're not trying to just put spin on it, right? But I think there's a way you can use the English language to add those positive sentiments, and as you mentioned in spin selling, not dwell on the problem. So well said.
Like, Ramsey, you're too tall. I'm like, okay, not much I can do about it. Thank you for pointing that out. All right, so it is time to move on to the not so fire round. These are the same 4 questions I've asked almost every guest. I tweak them every once in a while just to surprise people. So question number 1 is, what do you love about being an SE manager today?
My favorite thing usually happens many years later, and it's when someone comes back to me after they've left my team and moved on to another team within the company, or moved on in their career, and they come back and they say, hey, thank you for what you did. I really enjoyed working with you, and I appreciate what you did for me. Right. And that to me makes all the BS worth it. When someone comes back, you feel like, you know what, I did something right there, and help that person. And so that to me is, that's what it's all about. I think if you want to be a leader, you really got to care about helping people first and foremost, because there's a lot of BS that's not very much fun sometimes, but that is the most rewarding thing, is being able to actually over the long term help those direct reports move forward and really just see the greatness and the potential they have actually materialize wherever it be, hopefully within the organization, but wherever is best for them, and being able to see that success and staying in touch with them later on to really kind of understand. I think that actually is a feedback loop to me, because also there's, I'm not perfect. And so I also learn things, and being able to come back. I love talking to folks that have maybe moved from the team to another organization or elsewhere in our company, and get their feedback. And I find out things that maybe I could do better, and things that I'm doing better than maybe their current leader. And so he's constantly able to get that feedback loop.
All right. You mentioned a lot of BS, like handling a lot of BS. So the second question is, what would you change about the role?
I've jokingly in my head, and we do this informally, but I've oftentimes thought that just like you get a driver's license to drive a motor vehicle, that you should have a kind of a license to leverage your SE. You should go through a training class and understand the SE's value, and understand what they're going to bring to the table, and how to best partner with them. And I think really just sort of getting that mindset with sales, I think that's where we have a huge opportunity. And we look at it like, well, that's not our job to go, we try to do that. We help with onboarding. We have people that go and do classes. We have training. We have documentation. But you've constantly got to reset those expectations. And the more you can influence the sales leadership and the sales rep, especially as you have new sellers coming in the organization, and really you have the ability to sort of mold their perception of SEs. And so I've often in my head joked, hey, you can't get your SE. We have a new rep come on, and they're like, who am I going to work with? Well, hold on, we need to get you. You need to go through your training class where we teach you how to engage an SE effectively.
Well, it's funny, like, how there's the point systems on the driver's license. The more like tickets you get, the more points you lose. I think there should be a point system for salespeople. The more they abuse their sales engineers, they lose points, and then they won't have access to one. So I'll talk to you in a couple of months, see how you've implemented that. Yeah. So the third question is, other than John Kerr's books, which we've mentioned and everybody should read, is there a book or resource you recommend to your SEs to read before joining the company or starting?
There is, well, depending on sort of where, for those that are interested in I think what leadership, the difference between management and leadership is crucial. And I think whether you're a manager or not, you're a leader. You should be a leader to be effective. And so I think understanding leadership principles is really helpful. And So there's a website called manager-tools.com that has a podcast that I've listened to for over, I don't know now, maybe 10 plus years, maybe 12 years. And there's some books, The Effective Manager. And then they also have another sister site called Career Tools as well. So manager-tools.com is one of those resources that I think is really helpful. And I think that it helps you to be a leader. But I think what's interesting, people might think, well, I don't want to be a people leader. I think but it actually helps you manage up your manager and understand where your manager is coming from. And I think it also helps you, it just gives you some deeper insights on things. And then that's where the Career Tools is another one, which actually helps you think about your career, but it kind of comes from that same side. I found that to be a really valuable. I like the tactics that they lay out. One of the things that's really interesting is they talking about power, and you have role power, and then you have expertise power, and you have relationship power. And to me, that was eye-opening. It's like, yeah, exactly. And you realize relationship power is the only one that's going to get anything done 9 times out of 10. You have expertise power as an SE that can help you, but most of the hard problems actually require a relationship with a customer or an internal resource. And so they go over and explain things like that. And I think they're effective regardless of whether you're a leader or not in terms of a manager, but you should be leading your customers, and you should be leading your teams and your peers and other departments as an SE. We're very fortunate to be in the role that we're in, to have the opportunity. And I think that we should all embrace that and be the best that we can be.
Nice. All right, last question of the not so fire round. What habit are you working on today to improve either in your personal or professional life?
I actually was listening to your previous podcast that came out on January 10th. I was listening to that, and the gentleman was mentioning trying not to interrupt. And I thought to myself, that's a good one that I think I'm always working on, because I have an idea and trying not to, but I think I need to come up with another one. But I do like that one, sometimes not ideating too quickly to interrupt the flow of things. So I thought that was a kind of an always habit. I think for me right now, it's about focus and margin, always making sure that I can stay focused and build enough time to handle unexpected things. So always trying to redefine my day personally and professionally to make sure I've got extra margin to deal with unexpected things and being able to follow those up. So the habit is, hey, I can get this done. It's like, no, look, we got to make sure there's going to be someone that calls me during the day, reaches out, that has a problem that I didn't expect. And if I can be there to help them, and if I have enough margin built in my day to then stop what I'm doing, go help them and still meet my responsibilities, then that is, then I'm really, that gives me the flexibility to sort of go above and beyond. So to me, I think the habit is, I don't know if that's a habit or if it's a focus, but it's building margin into each and every day, so that I can stop what I'm doing when someone asks for help, and I've got enough bandwidth to make that happen. Because I think it's really easy to have your time leveraged on you by outside resources, but if you can then be able to prioritize your time where it needs to for really important things. So to me, building more margin is the habit I think that I'm trying to work on personally.
If I were to rephrase it, would this be a proper phrasing? Like, the habit is learning to say no to some things so you can say yes to others?
Yes, or resetting expectations on time, being able to, hey, yes, we can do that, but instead of doing that tomorrow, we're going to do that. When do we need to do that? Can we push this so I can then have time for my team? Realizing you're always going to have unexpected things come up from your team, so you can be there for them.
Nice. All right. Question before last. We finished the not so fire round. Is there a question you hoped I was going to ask you, but I didn't?
Possibly, but I might have forgotten what that was at this point. You had some great questions. I've enjoyed the dialogue and the conversation. I can't think of one, Ramsey.
Okay, well, it's if you do, please message me. We'll do another session. And I feel like we need to do a session about how you manage your time. But last question of the day, Richard, if people want to reach out and connect with you, where can they do that?
Sure, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Look me up at Richard Jackson at Rackspace Technologies, Rackspace Technology rather. I'm happy to help with sharing resources or advice or connecting you to other folks in my network that might be helpful. I've had a very fortunate career to work and support some very fantastic SEs over the years, and so now there's know a lot of people at different organizations. So if there's anything I can do to help, or love to kind of help support what you're doing, Ramsey, and building out the SE community. So thank you for what you're doing.
My pleasure. Thank you, Richard. Talk soon.
Take care.
Thank you, Richard, for coming on. Loved having you on. Loved talking to you. I hope to talk to you again in the future. And thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. This was an interesting show. Trust is a main component of sales engineering. And we work very hard to keep that trust, to earn that trust, and then to keep it and never to lose it. And goes not just with customers, but internally with our sales managers, sales engineer managers, teammates, and all that. So it was an interesting show. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. For myself, this is me signing off.